Hey, Sean here from SpeedCubeReview.com. This video has been a hotly anticipated one for the whole year. This is my Roux tutorial. I'm going to have a few different ones. This is going to be the beginner one. I'm expecting people to know a little bit about the cube beforehand, but if you don't know much about it and you're confused by the tutorial, feel free to ask questions below. It's hard to make a video for everyone. I get people that say some tutorials are too slow moving and some that say they're way too fast. So it's going to depend on your own knowledge, but feel free to ask questions below. Also, for a lot of these tutorials, I don't go through things multiple times, so it's made to go back or pause or rewatch some spots. So feel free to check this out. Thank you for watching, and this is the beginner Roux tutorial. First off, this mat is not going to do because this mat has a bunch of CFOP algorithms, so I'm just going to change this to an all-white background. Okay, so first off, what is Roux? Now I'm going to go through a Roux Solve that's the more advanced one with full algorithms just to show you what Roux looks like. So this is just a random hand scramble. And so for Roux, there's 4 main steps. First block, second block, CMLL, which is the corners of the last layer, and the M stands for the M slice because you don't worry about that. And then the last 6 edges. So first off, this first block here, and I'm going to do red, and we'll do this all together. Actually, that orange and blue isn't too bad either. So let's see here. Actually, yeah, after looking at this, I like this blue block here because there's a few other things that'll be really nice about this. So what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to walk through this one too slowly, but I make a block like this. So then I need to make a block on the other side. Most people do start with a block on the left and then do a block on the right. Depending on how you hold the cube, if you're right-handed or left-handed, you might like to start on the right side instead. But since this is a blue block, I will do a green one on this side. Now notice the centers don't really matter so much here, and I'm not really focusing on where those are. One thing that most people will do is put down this edge here though, the green and yellow edge, or whatever would be the down right edge. And that's back here. Now I didn't set it up beforehand, but that's definitely something that once you get more advanced, you want to set up that edge while you're building that block. So from here, I finish building on the rest of this. So I've made a square. I need to finish up right here. And now we have a second block. The next step is CMLL. And so I'm orienting the corners. The edges don't matter at this point. So I'm going to do a CMLL algorithm. Corners are now solved. And now edges. So the first step is to orient the 6 edges. These 4 and those 2. So they are now oriented. Then I'm going to solve the left and right edges, which will be the blue and the green. Mostly you'll put them on bottom and then solve them. Now this is a fun case where it's just the dots, and there's different ways of solving this. You could do M and E slices or S slices, but I find the fastest to do this algorithm, which, as much as we talk about not doing algorithms too much for Roux, this is one spot where it is good to know that one. The one thing that's great about Roux is there's not a lot of algorithms. It's very intuitive based, which can make it a little more difficult to start out because you're not just doing very algorithmic, memorizing this movement, doing this movement. There's a lot of options, and there's a lot of ways to sort of waste moves. So a couple things that are really great about Roux, it can be very few moves, averaging in the 40s, the upper 40s. Another thing is that there's not many algorithms. If you are one of like a top solver in Roux, at most really you would have 42 algorithms for CMLL, and that is it. But you could do 2-look CMLL and have 9 algorithms and be sub 10. What makes it a little more difficult is that it is more intuitive based. So there is a lot more thinking you have to do in each solve compared to something like CFOP. So let's go through each step and some little tricks to help you along the way. I'll go over through more tricks in the advanced tutorial. So again, I'm just going to hand scramble this. And when making a first block, one thing I would advise every beginner Roux solver to do is to be X2, Y color neutral. What that means is that you would solve with any color in front because these are Y moves, and then either white or a yellow on top and bottom. Being full color neutral could be useful. However, for most of the solves, doing X2 and Y will give you a ton of options, especially if you have any pair. When you are X2, Y color neutral, meaning white or yellow on top and any color in front, you can use any pair that's used. So like this one here, or if you had a pair with a white or yellow color, all of those could be used for your first block. Since I have a pair here, I'll either start with a red and yellow or blue and yellow edge. And let's see, our blue and yellow looks really good because that I can put here in one move. Red and yellow would take a couple moves, but with this blue and yellow, I can put it here and then insert. And this is what is really great about Roux is you can just go like that. Very easy insert. So we have the first square at this point. So we need to finish up with the blue, orange, yellow pair here. And the edge is right here. The corner is right here. There's a few ways we could do this, but what would be most efficient would be doing this and inserting with that F move. The first block you want to try to get done in about 10 moves or less. Top solvers will even go less than that on average, but that would be something to shoot for at the beginning. A couple things to focus on is don't worry about these other centers on the M slice. So for example, when I started, it was really hard for me to not build this block connected here, but it really doesn't matter. You can connect it anywhere as long as that is set. Another thing is don't worry about doing the cross edge first. So for example, I'm going to scramble this up and make sure I have a pair that already involved what would be the bottom edge. So right here, we already have this bottom edge set, meaning that we would want to put the blue and red edge right here. And let's find that. It's back here. So to insert this edge, I would do, and I'm going to call this D2, even though that's the blue face. So this is D2, L prime, D2. It takes practice to be able to see those blocks, and I would mess up a ton because I'm so used to CFOP, or the intuitive nature of it would allow me to mess up a bit. So take your time with it, go slow. Look through reconstructions of a lot of top solvers, and I'll put a link in the description where you can see that, but you can see what they do. So do the same scramble and then try to match what they do and see some cool tricks that you might not know intuitively. One other thing to note is that wide moves are going to be better than M slices. So for example, when we're doing this green and red edge pair right here, this is not going to be too bad. We could pair this up and do a few different things like that insertion, which that's one thing. Instead of inserting like this, you can save a move by doing that. You could make an argument that doing L and U moves will be faster than doing a wide R and a B move. However, for right now, we're focusing on doing a lower move count, and then the finger tricks will be something later on. But like I said, try to do more wide moves than M slices when possible. So for example, in this case, we could pair this up by doing M, U2, M2. However, if we do a wide R, U2, and then another R prime, that pairs it up down here, and that can be faster than moving your hand and doing M slices. So moving over to the second block, there are cases where you wouldn't put down that DR edge right away, the downright edge. However, most of the time you will do that. So since this is red, I would do orange and yellow right over here. And again, doing wide R moves to bring that up, and then an R2 to bring it down, instead of doing M2 like that. And this is a little more like doing F2 CMLL. So for example, here is green and orange, and that was an insert really nicely. However, we don't always want to do an F2L style insert because we have this M slice to work with. So we could do wide moves to manipulate other pieces. Now we wouldn't want to do one like that. However, let me set something up for an example. So for example, like this, we have the edge back here, the orange and blue, and the orange and blue corner right here. Well, to insert this for CFOP, you would probably do a rotation to pair that up. But for here, we could do M prime, U2, M, and now it's paired up. And this is one big thing for insertions. For here, how would we insert this edge without rotating and doing this? You could do reverse sledgehammer, which would be F R prime, F prime R. However, it's so much easier with the Roux because we can use wide moves. Right here, all you have to do is a wide R, U, R prime. Like that. So all these little tricks to help us insert these pieces really will help with move count and with the fluidity of the solve. Now, whether you're doing a pair in the front or the back, that final move you could either do with a wide R or a regular R. Why would you choose one over the other? Well, it can help you orient the center to be white or yellow to help with orientation of edges. So I'll go through a couple solves with these blocks before we go on to CMLL, where I'll go over the algorithms. So I'll put an actual scramble on the screen this time. That way we can do this together, or you might be able to find some better options than I have. Okay, so for this scramble now, if we look, we don't actually have any pairs made. So what I'll go to from there is seeing if we have any centers and edges already connected. And we have a couple. We have green and white, which might be nice because it's easy to see some of those pieces. We have these where we actually have two edges connected, which that could work as well. And so I think I'll do that one. Now, what I'm going to try to do is plan out as much as possible for this. So we have the green and orange corner here and the edge here, as well as that other blue and orange edge here. So here's what I've planned out for this. I'm not going to talk about the DR edge. I'm just going to do the whole left block. I'm going to try to preserve this and just not move it just yet. So I'm doing an F2 and a U2 to make that pair, and then insert. And now instead of doing this, I'm actually going to do that sort of F2L type insert, because from here, I'm going to take care of that corner by doing a D prime, R prime. And that moved that right into place. And I could just go D right back, and that made that block. From here, I've got the red and yellow edge. And here, like I said, most of the time you will just move this down. After this solve, I'll go through an example of why you wouldn't. I see this blue and yellow corner, and I can tell that the other edge is not here. So it's got to be back here. And so I'm just going to pair it up with an M2 and then insert. And then this, pair up and insert. So why would you not just put down the DR edge? Well, if you already have something paired up like this, you can put the edge in place and move it down. That way you're building a block a different way. However, I don't do that most of the time. A lot of the second block can be really intuitive. However, there will be a set of algorithms that might help you out that I will link in the description. So for this, you could do a lot of moves and separating it up. What I like to do though is do a U2, R2, U2, and then pair that up and insert. And that'll be in that link with the second block algorithms. Now I'm just going to do to-look CMLL, which would be orienting the corners of the last layer and then permuting it. I'll have a separate video with my full CMLL algorithms and executions. That will be out shortly after this video, and if it's already out, it will be linked in the description to a playlist. Now, these algorithms will be very similar to ones you might use for a beginner CFOP method, or even more like ones you would see for 2x2. So for example, I'm just going to do this one first, which would be a left-handed soon, which I like to do left-handed, but there's another way you could do it as well. So this left-handed soon would be L prime, U prime, L prime, U prime, L prime, U2, L. Or you could hold it this way and do R, U2, R prime, U prime, R, U prime, R prime. So soon would be the opposite of that, doing R, U, R prime, U, R, U2, R prime. And if you do prefer the left-handed ones, you could do this with your left hand doing L prime, U2, L, U, L prime, U, L. Now, I would recommend more sticking with one hand over the other. I find I do enjoy using my left hand a bit more with it, and as long as you're staying more in a home position, it should work well either way. But let's go through some of the easier ones. Now, as you've noticed, do not worry about the edges. We're only looking at the corners. And when you have headlights here, this is something that you do very differently with a beginner CFOP. And with this, you might do an algorithm like so. But that is way too many moves, and we do not need to do that. All you have to do when you have headlights is through rough, or F, sexy move, F prime. Holding them to the left, F, sexy move, F prime. So that will orient the corners since we don't need to worry about the edges. Now there's also F and double sexy move, which would be when you have headlights and these two sticking out on either side. You could do this algorithm of, but that one's a little more excessive when you could just do F double sexy, F prime. I will say it's good to know some of the other algorithms because if you do have a case where your edges are already oriented, you could do a different algorithm and keep those edges oriented since these will manipulate what those are. Continuing with that same idea, there's also F triple sexy move, where you have headlights on either side. I would say that there is another algorithm you could do, which is basically like two soons squished together and canceling each other out, where you hold the headlights on left and right and do that. It's definitely faster, and I would recommend learning it because you will be needing it for full CMLL anyways. But if you want to go the easiest route, I would just say F triple sexy would be the way to go. Next, we come to the one where you have the corners on either side. Now this one I've heard called hammerhead. When you do something like this in CFOP, if the edges are oriented, you do a sexy move followed by a sledgehammer with some of them being wide moves like this. But what's nice with Roux is that you don't have to do any wide moves here. You can still do sexy move, sledgehammer. Again, if you have edges oriented and you want to keep those, you could do the wide moves as well, but it's not necessary to learn those right now. And lastly, when we have this L shape, there's a few different algorithms we could do for this. I like to do what is the start of a Y perm. So F, R, U prime, R prime, U prime, R, U, R prime, F prime. And that moves us on to permuting the corners. Okay, from here, again, we don't worry about the orientation of the edges. And all we're trying to do is permute the corners and put them in the right spot. You only have two cases. If it's not already solved, you'll have one where you have one set of matching corners or none. And what you want to see is when the corners are on the left, you'll have opposite colors on the right side. So a way to help look for it, if you don't see the matching colors already, if you see any colors that are opposite colors like blue and green or red and orange, only on one side. So if you notice here, blue and green, but that's not opposite colors. Those are adjacent colors, meaning green and red. That will be on the right side. If this is a little too confusing at the moment, just look for the matching colors. And you could do a number of different algorithms, A perm, T perm, but most people do a J perm because of its speed, and it'll look like this. So these ones will take a little bit of time to learn if you are new to it, but they do flow quite well, and they will be needed for CMLL anyways if your corners are already oriented. The other one is if you have no headlights, which we already learned the first half of this Y permutation earlier. And so if you have no headlights and you look on every side, you have these opposite colors, blue and green, red and orange, blue and green, red and orange. You'll do this algorithm. And I like dividing it into two parts. So the first part, F, R, U prime, R prime, U prime, R, U, R prime, F prime. And then Sexy Moo Sledgehammer. From here, we go to the last edges. And for these edges, I'm going to start with the simplest case. This is something that confuses a lot of people starting out because we don't want to think of it like algorithms. There can be algorithms that will work, and I'll show you a couple, but we don't want to think of it like that. Really, the rest of your solve should be mainly intuitive feeling. So what we are mainly looking for is what's called an arrow case, where you have 3 misoriented edges on top and 1 on bottom. You do not need to do this to figure out what edges are misoriented on the bottom, because a couple rules. First rule, you will always have an even number of misoriented edges, 2, 4, or 6. So on top of here, we have 3, meaning 1 is going to be misoriented on bottom. The other one is you can already see the orientation of the front down edge right here. And since I don't see white or yellow right here, I know that this one's oriented correctly, which means the only one left is the one in back. Practice noticing your misoriented edges without moving the cube around. At first, it might take a little bit to decipher which this one is or seeing how many you have. The more you do it, the easier that will be, and force yourself to not turn the puzzle like this or like this. And the way you solve the arrow case is with any variation of M prime U M, M U M prime U prime M, or M U prime M prime. I think I said all 4 differently, but you get the point because I'll put it up. So for here, I put the arrow in back because the misoriented edge is in back here. And I'm going to do M, U, M prime. So for wherever the arrow is, if you have the misoriented edge in the front, you put the arrow in front and do M prime, U, M, or M prime, U prime, M. Whichever you do will work. However, one might be more efficient than the other, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So what are the other cases? Well, for right now, it's always just setting up the arrow case. So for example, we're going to go through the other cases that have 4 misoriented edges already. 2 on top, and we can see 2 on bottom, because since I can see the white edge here, I know that it's misoriented, and since we have to have an even number, there has to be 1 in the back. And to get this to an arrow case, all you have to do is an M2. Now we have the arrow case. And it doesn't matter what the top layer is like. It'll always get you to that, as long as the 2 top edges are next to each other. So for here, arrow case, and then I know the bad edge is in the back, so I fix it. Now if you have 2 misoriented edges on the left and right, and 2 on bottom, as long as those on the left and right, just do M prime U2 M, or MU2 M prime. Either one will give you that arrow case. That algorithm, I'm going to grab another cube right here. M prime U2 M swaps these 3 edges. So there's only one other case we can have 4 misoriented edges, and that's where they're all 4 on top. And the way you solve this is you do that M prime U2 M, which will swap this one down here and that one to here, which makes an arrow case. So this case is pretty much in my fingers, in my muscle memory, so when I see it, I can just go right into, and I don't need to think about setting up an arrow, I just do that movement. Okay, so what about when you have just 2 edges misoriented? When you have that, you will need to misorient 2 other ones. So I'm going to show you a couple examples. So if we have 1 misoriented on bottom and 1 on top, if the misoriented edge is in front, you put the 1 on top and back, and you do M prime U M, and that gives you an arrow case. If your misoriented edge on bottom is in back, you do the same thing just with an M move first. if you have two misoriented edges on top that are adjacent to each other, the angle I first learned it from was where I put them on the back left, and I do M prime U M, and that made an arrow case in the front. However, you could do it from any angle as long as you know the direction to move the M slices and the U slices. So I would advise, once you get used to this, trying from all four angles, because that's going to help you with the rest of the edges. A couple other cases are when we have the edges opposite each other on the top layer, and here we put them front and back, and M prime U M gives us an arrow case. And if those are on bottom, M prime U M prime again gives us an arrow case, which we can then solve. The last one is where you have 6 edges misoriented. Here you could do 3 of those arrow cases, 3 of those M prime U M algorithms. So I do it once. Then I have a misoriented edge on front and back, so I do it again. And then I solve it one more time. So once again, you get 2 edges, 4 edges, and then it's solved. However, this is one where a lot of people do a specific algorithm, which looks like this. And that changes the orientation of those 6 edges. The reason I like this one is I can more easily plan where pieces are going to be. So for example, I know that these 2 edges, when I do the algorithm, are going to be on the bottom layer, which makes it really easy to do the next step of the last 6 edges, which is solving the left and right edges, because they are now solved. So let's talk about how we do this, though, in a little bit better sense. The way you solve the left and right edges is by putting them on bottom first. And with the algorithm I showed you earlier, which was the M prime U2 M, you can do that. So for example, I'm going to put this red edge on bottom, M prime U2 M. And then I need to put the orange one on bottom. So I'm going to put it on the back and do M U2 M. They're on bottom now. And then I orient the top layer, so when I do an M2, it solves it. Just like that. So let's just do this randomly here. Also remember to make sure your centers are always oriented, meaning white or yellow is on top. Because if it's like this, it's going to be very difficult to look ahead and actually solve that. We want them oriented like this. So we have an arrow case. I can see the front one is misoriented. And I'm going to show you what I meant by, depending on what kind of arrow solution you do, I know that orange and red need to be on bottom. So I'm going to do M prime U M to put red on bottom. And then we do have orange back here. This is something that you want to try to be able to watch as you're solving, so you don't need to do that. But I'll do M U2 M prime. And then move the top layer so I can just do an M2, and they are now solved. Okay, and now we are at the last 4 edges. You want to start planning this before you get there. So while you're doing the left and right edges, you're planning ahead. We'll go into some tips and techniques on how to do that during the advanced Roux tutorial. So for right now, let's just worry about solving these. Much of the time, you will get a 3-edge case, which can be solved with M prime U2 M. So if you look here, we have 1 edge, 2 edge, and a 3rd one right here. I want to put this yellow one on bottom. So I'm going to do U2, M prime, U2, M. So an easy way to think of it is what color do you need to put on bottom, like that one. However, just thinking of that, it will not always be the most efficient. So there's a couple other patterns that you want to know about. So if you do M2, U2, M2, and I'll do another U2 to even this out, that's going to swap these 2, which is really good to know depending on different cases. So if I do M first and then do that, these 2 need to be swapped. And so I set it up so they swap on the front and back. One case you can get is a dot case. There is a way of solving it with M slices and E slices, doing something like this. However, I find it much easier to just solve doing this algorithm of U2, M2, U2, M, U2, M2, U2, M, instead of E2, M prime, E2, M. So that's all the different cases. Let's go through a couple solves and I'll walk through everything one more time. Like I said, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. Roux is a very nice method with very low move count. However, the intuitive nature can seem a bit confusing when you really just want an algorithm to solve it. But take your time with it. Yeah, so I'll start with this algorithm. And looking at it, we have a pair here. Now this is actually really nice for a couple of reasons. We have the orange and yellow and red and yellow edges opposite each other, which if we were doing a first block and second block, those ones are already in place. So as long as we can keep that red there, we don't need to plan and solve that one afterwards. And we already have a pair made right here, which we could insert very easily. So let's find the blue and orange corner and the blue and orange edge right here. So here's how I'm going to solve this. I'm going to do an F prime to set this up and insert. And now for here, we could do R2F or U2 F prime. Either one of those works. If we do the wide R2 F, we have to do another R2 for that pair. So I'm just going to do U2 F prime like I just did. And so that block is solved. Notice again, the M slice centers don't really matter at this point. Now we need to solve this side right here. Now this is where you do want to try to look ahead a bit more as you're solving so you can find where edges are and don't need to peek to the back at all. I'm going to try to solve this red and blue corner, and I know that this edge goes with it. So I'm going to do a U and M2, which will pair it up, and then insert with the wide R prime, U prime, R. Now this edge is here, and that edge is the red and green one. So I pair it up, R, U, and then I'm going to do a wide R prime to orient that center on top. So now we have orienting the corners. Then we have a Y perm we have to do to permute it. We have an arrow case on top because I can see 3 on top. This edge is fine, so it's in the back. And either if I do a U or U prime, it's going to put one of the left and right edges on bottom. M, U, M prime. So now this is a special case. And I'll talk about these more in the advanced Roux tutorial on how to save some moves. However, for right now, M prime, U2, M puts that red on bottom. U2, M2 solves those. And now I can see I need to swap these 2 blues and these 2 greens in the back because I want this to be blue and yellow and this to be green and yellow. And I can see the way they're positioned that those need to be swapped. So I'm going to do an M move and then that algorithm that is U2, M2, U2. Then it'll be solved with an M. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section below. Hit like, subscribe for more content like this in the future. And as always, stop by speedcubeview.com for more news and reviews.